But yeah, Pixelland Bones says maybe they'll have an easy way to make a Hashgraph sidechain you can spin up. Well, this is kind of where my brain goes, right? Is like with Swirlds Labs. Oh, actually, you know what? What we'll do is we'll watch this video and then I'll share my thoughts on it because this ties in nicely to the next story. Swirlds Labs changing their name to Hashgraph. There was a video posted by Hedera that had some of these updates. And let's just watch this because I think this is a great way to kind of intro this next story. So let's check this out.
Eric Pizzini, and I'm here to share some really exciting news. Swirlds Labs is changing its name to Hashgraph.
Value creation comes from having a thriving ecosystem of builders who are developing decentralized apps on top of the Hedera network. The ethos of a public network is that it should evolve and grow on its own over time and not be steered by a select group of a few people. So for that reason, in May of 2022, we left Hedera, Lehman and I, to found Swirlds Labs. And we did this with the explicit goal of establishing a standalone company that would not only support the Hedera network's software development, but also contribute independently to the Hedera ecosystem with new products that use and are complementary to the Hedera network and the ecosystem.
I'm excited about this name.
So I mean, Lehman coming in hot. I just want to pause it there real quick and just kind of point out that there's some interesting things about this video that I just am watching and I want to just speak to. So what Mance was talking there from his, booth at the Olive Garden or whatever, is actually really interesting because, some of the messaging here is very focused on coming back to this like decentralization, Mance specifically saying like shouldn't be in the control of a few select people, this and that. Thinking about Charles' letter that he published and kind of speaking to some of these things, it definitely does get you thinking about Hedera's stance in regards to where things are at in the ecosystem, accountability, transparency, all those different types of things. And some of the things that Mance was speaking to kind of from a, I'll use a marketing term like key messaging standpoint, does feel, not that it feels fresh, but it does feel like we're bringing in some, like classic elements of like the original kind of Hedera Hashgraph kind of stuff that I think, not that it's been sidelined, but I do think that there are these core values that I think do need to kind of be held true with the network. And so some of those things Mance was talking about, and I know it's one thing to say them and another thing to actually make those changes. But like I was talking about with Gerbert, right? We're starting to see some of those changes. We're also seeing this messaging coming out up front. So it is interesting. But what Lehman has to say is much more interesting. So let's check this out.
Change. This is cool. So Hashgraph is a word the world knows. The Hashgraph consensus algorithm, I remember at the very first hackathon, we passed out t-shirts that said, "What is Hashgraph?" And people now know. Everybody knows what Hashgraph is. And I love that we're going full circle to make our name be Hashgraph. And really what we're talking about is recovering the original vision of shared worlds. The idea is that...
So that's a key phrase here too that I just want to stick on. I don't think people pointed this out, but again, Lehman using the word recovering. I think that's a really important word to keep in mind here is Lehman saying we're recovering the original vision of shared worlds. That to me was very strong. Like Lehman saying we're recovering the vision of shared worlds. So that was very interesting.
There isn't just one ledger. There's a million different little shared worlds, and anyone can wave their hand and carve out a piece of cyberspace and create their own little shared world that's private. But then they all link to each other and to the public ledger, and that we are able then to talk back and forth. And so this shows why things like bridges will be very important. It's critical that we be able to create these ledgers. You can create a ledger that's private, that's only in one country, only run by certain types of people.
Also too, so mentioning, this is something that I was talking about with Gerbert is like when we look at what Lehman's talking about here, and maybe folks that missed out on it years ago, years ago, part of the reason that I was so excited about Hedera and Hashgraph is, and this isn't sharding necessarily, but when you have the ability to take Hashgraph and create your own DLT, right? Your own distributed ledger that connects to Hedera, what that means is that a bunch of DEXs could have their own Hashgraph, or a bunch of supply chain companies or banks or whatever could have their own private Hashgraphs. A country could have its own private Hashgraph that has its own rules, its own governance. Maybe it doesn't even use HBAR in any way at all. And so that's what's really interesting is we've known for a long time that private networks are going to be a component of crypto, right? Like you're not going to have a group of when you think about distributed ledger technology, you go, well, that's great for healthcare, great for hospitals, whatever it might be. But you're not going to want to have that information on a public ledger. You're going to want to have it behind, hidden, private. But then you think, well, when it comes for transparency, when it comes to, let's say, buying and selling data or whatever it might be, maybe you've got an advertising or marketing ledger that wants to communicate with the healthcare ledger with their own sets of rules and guidelines and this and that, with these separate networks all around connected to Hedera, which is kind of like the center point of these shared worlds. That's what got me excited about Hedera is like, oh, like maybe when you start a group chat with somebody, that creates a ledger where you can exchange value. You own the ledger with that person in your group chat. And when you close the group chat, the ledger is closed, but it allows you to communicate and transfer value amongst other ledgers or other group chats that can all interface with Hedera. So the vision is like these thousands or tens of thousands or millions of separate networks, DLTs, that all run Hashgraph and either connect to Hedera or don't connect to Hedera, but can interact with each other seamlessly. Because a big problem in Web3 and crypto is like, I want to move my assets from Ethereum to Polygon, or I want to move my NFT from Solana to Hedera. It's like you got bridges and you got to wrap it and you got this and that. They're not compatible with each other. So there's this layer in between these networks that allows you to do those things through bridging and stuff. And so with this vision, it's like you could have a bunch of these other different networks that have their own features and different qualities and all sorts of different things that can compete with each other, but can still seamlessly interop with each other because they're using the same kind of DNA. And so that's the vision here. And so it's very interesting. And that was something that I think was touched on when Eric Pacini, the new CEO of Swirlds Labs, was mentioning SPNs, special purpose networks. And people got a little spooked. They're like, oh, private networks. What's this going to do for the price of HBAR? Is TPS going to go up, or are they not going to be using the network? And I know that Rob Allen on Australian Payments Plus, governing council member, mentioned that, Australian Payments Plus might want to use a special purpose network, right? A private Hashgraph. And so I think this ties into what Lehman's talking about and kind of what he's talking about in recovering, keyword being recovering, this vision for Hedera, which is we have the Hedera network. It's the shared public network where all the action is. And then outside of it, if you have special purposes that you need, you can create your own Hashgraph with its own rules and send state proofs to Hedera. So you can communicate with all those other shared worlds with your own rules and stuff. So it's all very interesting. That was a key aspect that excited me most about Hedera. When it comes to scale, knowing that not every use case is going to be built on the public Hedera network and going to, process a cajillion transactions, right? So it is this kind of grand vision that I think has been lost a little bit in recent years with, the lack of focus, the lack of attention to short-term goals and survivability of the network. And so again, Lehman's saying, we want to recover the kind of like the Hedera vision is very interesting, but let's continue.
people, and then you can have Hedera is the public ledger, and then you can have them talking to each other. You can even imagine private ledgers that are temporary, like while you're playing a game, one is created during your game, and after an hour, it shuts down when your game ends, and then it talks back to the major ledger, the public ledger, and records things. So I love this idea that we are now coming full circle, and we will be able to do this now under the name of Hashgraph, which is exceedingly exciting to me.
I couldn't be more excited about building on the top of the vision that Mans and Lehman set for us about 6 years ago. I want Hashgraph in the future to be a verb. I want people to say, did you Hashgraph your application, your business model, your idea? And together as an ecosystem, I know we can do that and push the limit of what can be built with the Hashgraph technology.
I don't know if people are going to be saying, did you Hashgraph that quite yet? But very cool idea. But for me, there's a lot to unpack here. And I think that, again, what's most exciting for me is starting from, at least my perspective, and I might be wrong, but starting to get a little bit of clarity in how private networks are going to play a role in the Hedera ecosystem. And I don't think it's this kind of pivot or sudden shift or change from Swirlds Labs, now Hashgraph. I don't think it's that kind of thing. I think that it's more so what Lehman's talking about, which is recovering that aspect or that vision of the network. So I think that that's an interesting thing. And it's not just enterprise stuff. Like I could totally see, for example, a DEX on Hedera, right? Sometimes there's aspects of this network that don't work really well for a DEX or an NFT ecosystem, right? Token association, what's that? Or whatever it might be. Maybe they want to move to their own network with its own rules, its own optimizations. It's a special purpose for these things, but have the freedom to completely and seamlessly interop with the public Hedera network and have that be a seamless experience for the user. And so it does get you thinking about what the future might look like for Web3 and this kind of understanding that it's not going to be one monster network everything's going to live on, right? It's definitely going to be this nebulous cluster potentially of thousands or whatever, however many networks. So it's very interesting. And the definition of what a network is, like Lehman's saying, it's like, maybe it is like a network of hospitals or an entire country or whatever it might be, or it's your game you're playing or something, or a document that you're editing. So it's very interesting. So that's kind of my take on kind of the video, but diving in a little further, there was an article published on the new kind of Hashgraph website. It is going to be weird because one thing that folks might not realize is a little bit of history here. Let's go down memory lane here for a second. And I'll get some memory lane music going. Back in the day, when Hedera was starting out, right, there was Swirlds Incorporated, which is on the governing council, as people know. And Swirlds is separate from Swirlds Labs, right? Swirlds still exists. And when Hedera was created, it was a new entity that used the Hashgraph algorithm from Swirlds, and Swirlds became the permanent member on the governing council. So that was that kind of period. And when Hedera got started, it was called Hedera Hashgraph, and all of the social profiles were called Hashgraph. And so myself and everybody in the ecosystem, we never referred to the network as Hedera. We referred to it as Hashgraph, right? Whenever I was talking about it, I never really used the word Hedera. I would just say, oh, this is Hashgraph. It's the Hashgraph Governing Council. Like, it was very different. And then I remember I talked about this on the show literally years ago, 100 episodes ago or whatever, that Hedera rebranded from Hashgraph to Hedera. So that was a big moment. And then the kind of decentralization component came in, where we got the HBAR Foundation. We got Swirlds Labs. People left to those organizations, all those different types of things. And so what they're talking about in that video of like this full circle moment is now we do have an organization named Hashgraph again, right? So that's also another layer to this. Is Hedera used to literally be named basically Hashgraph. And so there's so many different aspects to this that, to be honest, can be confusing. I do think that there's a confusing component to this, but I do think that in the long run, it makes sense. So that is what it is. So anyways, quick history lesson. But let's continue on. So there's this article that they published. Hello, Hashgraph, the next chapter in our journey. Now, there is some interesting excerpts from this that I will read. And this is authored by CEO Eric Pacini. So here, Eric writes, Lehman and Mance have laid out an inspiring vision for what's next, what they call shared worlds. This concept envisions an internet of value where different DLT networks converge seamlessly, connecting traditional enterprise with DeFi. It's a vision that deeply excites me because it aligns perfectly with our mission to innovate and lead. So that's kind of what we were talking about. So they're really hammering it, right? This is Hashgraph's vision, is having Hedera be this center of the nebula and creating a future internet, as they say, or trust layer of the internet, where everything can have its own network, connect with each other seamlessly. And for anyone that kind of looks at this and goes like, well, what does this mean for HBAR? What does this mean for TPS? If all the transactions are happening on another network and then there's just one state proof sent an hour to Hedera, or whatever it might be. What I would say is think instead about like, what does the ecosystem look like in that shared world? There might be more money to be made in that shared world than there is on Hedera. So, and there might be more TPS there than there is. So it's very interesting to kind of see what that looks like. And does that shared world use HBAR, or is there a different gas token essentially? Or is there no gas token? What is the economic model? So there's so many different fascinating things that you can start to think about. And I'd encourage people when they start thinking about this concept of shared worlds to, of course, think critically on how it could positively and negatively impact Hedera, the network, but also kind of like expand a little bit and kind of go like, but what would those shared worlds look like? And I think of something like a shared world that's purpose-built and designed for decentralized exchanges, borrowing and lending, DeFi, where there's an NFTs or something where there's no token association. There's way more focus put on it. Maybe there's a foundation, a part of that. Maybe it has a different gas token, a different fee structure. That's where things start to really thrive. And it's instantly interoperable with the, real estate shared world. And things can move back and forth. So there's all these kind of different ways you can think about it. I mean, that's probably a horrible example, but that's just kind of the thinking I kind of do with this stuff. It's looking at the opportunities too. And this is also an important excerpt from this article, which is the demand for private uses of Hashgraph is growing, especially in regulated markets where tailored solutions are crucial. While we continue to support Hedera as a general purpose public network, our focus at Hashgraph is expanding to include private networks and specialized use cases. And I think that this right here is where people might find cause for concern. Specifically this part. While we continue to support Hedera as a general purpose network, our focus is blah, 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 blah. So it definitely, there's no way to get around that the focus on Hedera from Hashgraph's perspective is changing, whether it's growing or shrinking or whatever it is. There's definitely some change happening. So I think this is what we keep an eye on. And again, this kind of, for me, the key question is, are special purpose networks and shared worlds the same thing? If so, that's really interesting. If not, then it's a different type of conversation where, is Hashgraph going to be licensing out Hashgraph to organizations in a capacity that isn't a shared world, that's just literally software licensing? So it is interesting. There's a lot to think about. There is some stuff to criticize. There is some stuff to think bigger about, But overall, I think that what we're asking for in this ecosystem is change. This is movement. This is change. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see what things moving forward looks like. And, you know, I think people definitely have some questions, and I think that we'll get answers as we go. I know that Charles, the president of Hedera, retweeted this. So he's in the loop. And I did do a few posts on this that we'll just touch on. I asked the community what their thoughts were on this, and some folks shared thoughts. So haven't read through these yet, but we'll see. Stein.hbar says, you don't just rebrand an entire company because you can. Hopefully something big is on the way. So, I mean, fair. That's a good point. You're not just doing this just for the sake of doing it. Ray says, love it for so many reasons. Something Lehman said was interesting about bridges and additional networks. First, it was called Hedera Hashgraph. Then they split decentralized. Could there be more names coming in front of Hashgraph? Kind of meaning, I guess, these shared worlds. So something else kind of interesting to think about. Better name, better branding. Hashgraph is the innovative entrepreneurial arm of the ecosystem. If I could invest in them rather than the Morebound governing council arm, I would. So obviously there's some people that are stoked about this more so than even Hedera itself. Hashgraph spearheads Hedera's marketing, product innovation, and technological development. So will they be in charge of marketing now? I don't know. I mean, to be honest, the stuff that Swirlds Labs, now Hashgraph, has been doing in regards to marketing for the network, I don't think has been sufficient. So I don't know why Hedera would double down on that. It would be interesting to see kind of what they're going to be bringing to the table in regards to marketing. It's got to be better than what they're doing. And I know, they're for Karate Combat is coming up, and we got to have a new ad. I mean, I was freaking out. Other people were freaking out about the advertisement for Karate Combat. We all know what we're talking about. So we got to have a new advertisement for that, for this Karate Combat. It can't be that hard to do. Since Lehman and Mance both came from a military background, I see it as a cross-domain bridging capability. Think NIPR net versus SIPR net to keep private data private and off the public DLT as long as it doesn't create another token. I'm bullish. I didn't know what they were talking about. So they explained they are terms used in the government for unclassified NIPR and classified SIPR networks. The unclass connects to the global internet with restrictions, and the class basically is air-gapped with the information remains secured. So that's a kind of interesting way to look at it, like a private hash graph that's effectively like air-gapped versus a public hash graph network, which is connected to the Hedera network. It kind of, you could see that parity there. They want to pivot to private ledgers to actually generate some revenue from Hashgraph tech. I mean, fair. I mean, maybe they're just licensing Hashgraph. Yep, I think that this is a point that I can agree with too. This is with the little we know, but this is my kind of thoughts as well. Do special purpose networks equal shared worlds, or do they not? That's kind of what we want to figure out. Something is cooking. I do think that something is cooking. Easier relate to Hedera. I don't think they're scammers. Yeah, honestly, I think that it's consistency. It's better than Swirlds Labs, to be honest. I also asked some folks in the Hashgraph Enthusiasts community, which is currently at 1,500 members. Shout out. That's awesome. But I asked some folks. So some people feel like this is kind of lame when it comes from a marketing and branding standpoint. Again, I mean, I can see that perspective. HBAR 1000 says, I think it's good for name recognition and for increasing brand awareness. Normies don't know what Swirlds is and likely never will, and it just makes sense. Hashgraph sounds better than Swirlds as the only permanent council member. Now, just to clarify again, Swirlds still exists. Swirlds has not changed their name. Swirlds Labs and Swirlds are two separate companies. So if we look at Swirlds, still the same. Swirlds still exists. It's not going to change. Swirlds is still around, and Swirlds is the entity on the governing council. Swirlds Labs has changed. Swirlds Labs is not on the governing council. Just to be clear, Swirlds Labs is not on the governing council. So this is not true. But I do agree that brand awareness and stuff is really important. Coinman, the H Barbarian, says, personally, I always felt that shared worlds to Swirlds was an awkward sounding one. Agreed. Hashgraph cuts to the heart of the novel algorithm that Lehman Barrett created. True. So, I mean, like, Swirlds Labs, I don't think was a great name. Works better. Rebranded Swirlds Labs, blah, 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 blah. I think this is the general consensus here is folks agree that, you know, it definitely is a better name. It's a better brand. Swirlds is, I guess, okay as the governing council member, but this separate Swirlds Labs organization that was, I guess, more marketing focused and all that kind of stuff. It's better to be called Hashgraph. So, and it, you know, goes together well, peanut butter and jelly, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I don't hate it. I think it's good. So those are my thoughts on it. Hashgraph. You know, it feels natural. I mean, it is weird. It is confusing. I think it's less confusing for new people. I think this is the key thing. It's less confusing for new people because they're coming into it and it is what it is. But for folks like myself that know the history and have seen the names changing and things separating, it adds to the confusion in a weird way. So, I mean, I don't think it's super valid. I think that that just comes with the territory of being early. So I think this generally, yeah, makes more sense. The logo's not bad. The new website's cool. I think that what we want now is some more substance regarding the vision for Hashgraph. Also, we want to better understand what do they mean by special purpose networks? Are special purpose networks and shared worlds two separate things? That would be great to know.